exporter of energy to the rest of the world, investments made by the energy sector will continue to provide high-paying jobs for a diversifying workforce and promote domestic energy security. Pipelines are critical infrastructure for supporting our energy sector and represent the safest, most efficient, most environmentally friendly mode of transporting energy. Pipelines are an essential part of the energy supply chain and ensure communities across the country and our allies abroad have access to affordable and reliable American energy. The recent supply chain crisis and rising inflation, coupled with the war in Ukraine, demonstrate the importance of having reliable, easy access to energy and the negative consequences of restricting or cutting off our energy supply. The Pipelines and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, or PHMSA, is the federal agency responsible for overseeing the safe and reliable operation of the United States pipeline network. Promoting pipeline safety has been a priority for Congress, which enacted several bipartisan laws in recent years to reauthorize crucial pipeline safety programs at PHMSA and direct the agency to initiate actions that advance pipeline safety. The 2020 Pipeline Safety Reauthorization made advances in safety through some common sense policy and a balanced, not overly burdensome, regulatory approach. And it is essential that Congress ensure PHMSA is prioritizing and implementing prior congressional mandates and does not impermissibly offer administration priorities over these mandates. PHMSA must prioritize hiring competent pipeline safety inspectors, not more lawyers, and must keep its focus on protecting people and the environment by advancing the safety and reliability of pipelines. Today, we will hear from PHMSA on progress made towards implementing the Pipes 2020 Act and how it is working to meet the requirements set by Congress. Pipeline safety is a collaborative effort between PHMSA, state governments, industry, and the public. We must continue to promote cooperation between stakeholders and regulators to find a balanced approach that fosters innovation in technology and implementation of best safety practices. I'm looking forward to hearing from industry and public safety representatives today about some of these practices and new technologies that can help us improve safety. This includes how we can support the development of infrastructure to transport new and emerging fuels, such as carbon dioxide and hydrogen, and how innovative technology and operations are being used to improve inspections, leak detection, leak prevention, and the overall safety of pipeline networks. And as Congress looks to the next pipeline safety reauthorization, we must embrace ways in which the industry and regulators can work together to achieve our goal of zero pipeline incidents. I hope to renew the tradition of passing a bipartisan pipeline safety bill from this committee, and I look forward to working with the ranking member, my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, and the Senate to accomplish this important goal. I have a few documents to enter into the record. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record the following items: a March 8th, 2023 letter from the American Public Gas Association, a March 8th, 2023 letter from the American Petroleum Institute, and a March 8th, 2023 letter from the Distribution Contractors Association and the United States Association of Union Plumbers and Pipe Fitters. And without objection, so ordered. In closing, I ask our witnesses I want to thank you all for coming today. I appreciate you being here. I will now yield back and recognize the ranking member Payne for 5 minutes for an opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Nels. It's an honor and a privilege to serve on this committee with you, and looking forward to your leadership and the bipartisan manner in which you've already demonstrated is greatly appreciated. I'd like to also thank Chairman Graves for his help, and also thank the ranking member Larson for being here, and all the witnesses that are with us today. Thank you. Before I get to the subject of today's hearing, I want to note that this is the first hearing of the Railroad Subcommittee this Congress, and the first following Norfolk Southern derailment in East Palestine East Palestine, Ohio. This has been followed by an additional Norfolk Southern derailment in southeast Michigan and Springfield, Ohio. Just this week, a Norfolk Southern employee lost his life in a collision in Cleveland. Chairman Nels, thank you for visiting East Palestine immediately following the derailment. I look forward to working with you, this Congress, to tackle freight and rail safety. I'm pleased that the Senate has put forth a bipartisan freight rail safety bill, and I'm hopeful that we can do the same on this side. The safe operation of pipelines is vital to protect both our energy needs and the communities these pipelines run through. These are not just abstract concerns. Just last December, a pipeline operated by TC Energy ruptured in northeast Kansas, spilling over 14,000 barrels of crude oil. If you have a hard time visualizing 14,000 barrels, it's the same volume as 20 rail tanker cars. In Linden, New Jersey, in my district, a pipeline operated by Buckeye Partners ruptured and spilled 350 barrels adjacent to a fragile wetland in March 2021. We must learn lessons from these incidents, as well as the Danbury incident and Satarsha, Mississippi, the Beta offshore incident in San Pedro Bay, California, and the Freeport LNG incident in Quintana Island. PHMSA reports that in 2022, 631 pipeline incidents occurred, from which 10 individuals died, 24 were injured, and property damages totaled more than $860 million. Of these incidents, 17 were serious and 267 were significant. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today about their commitment to safety. If PHMSA has the resources necessary to hold bad actors accountable, and how can we make sure that what goes into pipelines stays in the pipes? I'm also interested to hear about PHMSA's progress on carbon dioxide pipeline rulemaking. The safe transmission of carbon dioxide to sequester locations is vital to meeting our carbon reduction goals, and I want to make sure this can be implemented without delay. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the time, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Payne. I appreciate that. I now recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Larson, for 5 minutes opening statement.
Thank you, Chair Nels and Ranking Member Payne for calling this hearing on pipeline safety. On June 10th, in 1999, a pipeline explosion in Bellingham, Washington, claimed the lives of two 10-year-old boys and a young man of 18 years. The explosion released 237,000 gallons of gasoline into Whatcom Creek that flowed through Whatcom Falls Park into Bellingham, Washington. The ensuing fireball caused millions of dollars of damage, shocked the community that day, and is still a seminal moment in the history of the town of Bellingham. It's that explosion that spurred my commitment, which has been steadfast over the last 20 years, to the highest level of pipeline safety. For my entire tenure in Congress, I have fought to reduce the risk of pipeline incidents, promote transparency of pipeline safety information for local communities, and increase accountability for pipeline operators. And Mr. Chair, I'd ask unanimous consent to submit a letter for the record from a parent of one of the boys killed in the explosion in my district, Bellingham City Council member Skip Williams. This letter outlines a number of recommendations to improve the safety and oversight of our pipeline system. So I ask unanimous consent to enter that in the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
I share many of Council Member Williams' views, and as ranking member, will ensure that this committee's work to reauthorize the Pipes Act of 2020 puts safety at the forefront of every policy decision. Putting safety first means greater oversight and accountability of the activities of pipeline operators. It means greater transparency for local communities and the public. Reducing the risk of incidents means applying safety requirements where appropriate to existing infrastructure. PHMSA, the agency, cannot effectively do its job if the infrastructure already in the ground is off limits to safety regulation. Improving safety means preventing incidents. PHMSA needs to have the resources and staff to inspect pipelines, conduct investigations if incidents occur, and to take appropriate enforcement action. I'm especially pleased that we'll hear detailed recommendations on what actions Congress can take to advance safely from a fellow Washingtonian and constituent from Whatcom County on today's panel, Bill Karam, Executive Director of the Pipeline Safety Trust. The trust was formed following the deadly Olympic pipeline explosion in my district, and I think you'll hear from Bill that the Pipeline Safety Trust is both a watchdog and also can be a partner with communities and with the industry to ensure long-term safety. I appreciate each of our witnesses as well being here today. I want to welcome PHMSA Deputy Administrator Tristan Brown, who visited the district to tour the Olympic pipeline site in Bellingham. PHMSA has a new charge as well since the enactment of the bipartisan infrastructure law to distribute $1 billion over 5 years under the first ever natural gas distribution infrastructure safety and modernization grant program. The $200 million per year available to municipalities and community-owned utilities in FY22 is the first installment of funding to repair or replace natural gas pipelines and help reduce incidents and improve safety, and this is just the beginning. All safety responsibility, although must not fall to PHMSA, I encourage the involvement of communities and public interest organizations in pipeline safety, and I support ongoing grants to support the 400 state-based safety inspectors of interstate pipelines and local distribution systems. Finally, as we convene the Subcommittee on Railroads, Pipelines, and Hazardous Materials for the first time in Congress, I do want to call attention to the request from members on my side of the aisle, led by Ranking Member Payne and Representative Sykes, that this committee hold a hearing on the Norfolk Southern derailment in East Palestine, Ohio. I endorse and support their efforts. Pipelines play a critical role in the nation's infrastructure and the daily lives of Americans. And we're here today to make sure the national pipeline network safely delivers essential energy products across the country. I look forward to today's discussion. With that, I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Larson yields. Again, I'd like to welcome our witnesses and thank you for being here today. I ask unanimous consent that the witnesses' full statements be included into the record. Without objection, so ordered. As your written testimony has been made part of the record, the subcommittee asks that you limit your oral remarks to 5 minutes. With that, Deputy Administrator Brown, you are recognized for 5 minutes for your testimony.
Thank you, Chairman Nels. Thank you, Ranking Member Payne. Thank you, Ranking Member Larson, and to the rest of the committee. Welcome to the new members, and welcome back to the returning members. At the Department of Transportation and within PHMSA, safety is the top priority of Secretary Buttigieg, Deputy Secretary Trottenberg, myself, and all of the employees at PHMSA. We all appreciate this subcommittee's interest and support for strengthening pipeline safety across our country. PHMSA is responsible for overseeing the safe transport of hazardous materials through pipelines and also via other modes of transportation, including planes, trains, trucks, automobiles, and vessels. On that note, although I'm here with a panel of pipeline experts to discuss PHMSA's work in advancing pipeline safety, I want to take this chance to acknowledge that as an agency, as a department, and across the federal government, we remain focused on holding Norfolk Southern accountable for the terrible tragedy in East Palestine, Ohio. And we'll continue to provide support to that community and to the National Transportation Safety Board's investigation. Over the years, despite oftentimes fierce opposition from the industries we regulate, PHMSA has worked to strengthen safety measures for transporting hazardous materials. And we look forward to working with members on both sides of the aisle to continue those efforts by statute, by regulation, or any other means of achieving results for the people of East Palestine and many other communities that have suffered similar incidents in the past. PHMSA's oversight of hazardous materials via other modes includes nearly 1 in 10 goods that are transported in the United States. Everything from nuclear waste to lithium-ion batteries to explosives used in excavation, mining, and energy production. In the United States, nearly 2/3 of the energy we consume is transported via a pipeline that we regulate. Over the past few decades, growth in energy production in the United States has increased to record levels over the last few years. Concurrently, U.S. transportation of these products has increased, and exports of energy have also reached record levels. This has placed new and heightened demands on our pipeline and refined product storage infrastructure, as well as export facilities such as LNG terminals, which PHMSA also regulates. Under Secretary Buttigieg's leadership, PHMSA has been focused on executing bipartisan congressional mandates in the PIPES Act of 2020, historic infrastructure investments that came from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law of 2021, that Ranking Member Larson mentioned, strengthening our safety mission, and ensuring the U.S. maintains the most efficient and competitive transportation system in the world. The Bipartisan PIPES Act of 2020 significantly strengthened PHMSA's jurisdiction related to the minimization of methane emissions across all of our regulated entities in an effort to improve public safety and protect our environment. Our efforts on this front include completing 3 major legacy pipeline safety rulemakings, each of which were more than a decade in the making, including new regulations on 400,000 miles of gas gathering pipelines, pipeline rupture detection and rupture mitigation valve installation, and coastal ecological unusually sensitive areas, including the Great Lakes. Our regulatory agenda over the past 2 years has been exceptionally full. PHMSA has been hard at work closing out years-long, and in some cases decades-long, efforts on final rules, as well as initiating important new rulemakings from the 2020 PIPES Act. However, with all of the good work that is being done to advance pipeline safety by the promulgation of new rules, PHMSA has faced a new normal in terms of increased challenges to its rulemakings. This is resulting in longer development timelines and diversion of personnel resources to respond to legal challenges. That time that could otherwise be utilized to advance the myriad congressional directives and regulatory priorities of the agency and stakeholders. Regardless of these challenges, PHMSA won't be swayed from its mission. PHMSA has initiated several priority rulemakings that look to address important PIPES Act mandates and emerging safety issues, including leak detection and leak repair, the safety of gas distribution pipelines, updated LNG facilities regulations, and an overhaul of the safety requirements for pipelines transporting carbon dioxide. As previously noted, PHMSA's oversight responsibilities continue to grow both in terms of the types of facilities we regulate as well as the number of facilities we regulate. And we have had to continuously operate relatively leaner as compared to our expanded universe of regulated facilities. To meet congressional directives to improve efforts to attract and retain pipeline engineers and inspectors, PHMSA has undertaken new recruitment and retention efforts, has kept up with the hiring mandates included in the PIPES Act, both for inspectors as well as for regulatory personnel that have helped lead the agency to some of its most important productive years ever in terms of both finalizing rulemakings as well as enforcement actions, and has reduced the trend in hazardous materials pipeline incidents. In closing, thank you again for the opportunity to engage with you on the critical issues facing PHMSA and in turn facing a major component of the largest, most sophisticated energy transportation system in the world. We look forward to continuing to work with you to improve pipeline and hazardous materials safety and to reduce associated environmental impacts. Look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Mr. Black, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, members of the subcommittee. I'm Andy Black, President and CEO of the Liquid Energy Pipeline Association. LEPA represents pipeline owners and operators delivering transportation fuels like gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel, transportation feedstocks like crude oil, home heating fuels like propane, industrial feedstocks like ethane, and low-carbon solutions like renewable diesel, carbon dioxide, and liquefied petroleum gas. We have over 50 members delivering over 20 billion barrels annually across a pipeline network of nearly 230,000 miles. As Congress examines federal pipeline safety, let me begin by providing some data and information on the current state of liquid pipeline safety. According to publicly available data from PHMSA, pipelines are the safest way to transport energy, and they're getting safer. Over the last 5 years, total incidents from liquid pipelines have dropped 25%. Incidents impacting people and the environment are down 15%. This last metric, incidents impacting people and the environment, was developed jointly by PHMSA, the Pipeline Safety Trust, and industry under the recommendation of the National Transportation Safety Board. Not only are pipelines getting safer, they are the safest way to deliver energy. A report for Congress completed by PHMSA compared incident and spill rates across pipeline, rail, and trucks. PHMSA found pipelines have a lower incident rate per barrel of crude oil shipped compared to rail or truck, and the lowest percentage of crude oil released compared to rail or truck. Administration analysis and conclusion that pipelines are the safest way to deliver energy is also bipartisan. Secretary Hillary Clinton's State Department found not only would a major proposed pipeline be the safest way to deliver energy, it would be safer and have less impact on the environment than taking no action at all. The Obama administration found rejecting that pipeline project and shipping the same energy by rail would increase the risk of oil release by over 800 times and barrels released by 2.6 times. Now, in many locations, shipment by rail or truck is necessary and generally a safe delivery mode, but we're proud that pipelines are the safest way to deliver the energy American consumers need and want. We're also not resting on improving pipeline safety. In partnership with the American Petroleum Institute, we have ongoing initiatives to improve public engagement, develop best practices for managing geohazards and seismicity, improve pipeline inspection technologies, implement pipeline safety management systems, and share safety improvement lessons from pipeline incidents and near misses. Before that, in the last several years, we've completed initiatives on crack management, pipeline integrity management, data integration, hydro testing, and emergency response. We look forward to Congress reauthorizing federal pipeline safety provisions and making improvements to PHMSA pipeline programs. LIPA recommends improvements in 3 categories: leveraging safety technologies and knowledge, safe, low-carbon future, and improving PHMSA safety programs. I've attached to my testimony brief summaries of each of our recommendations. I'll highlight 2 today. First, a continuing frustration for pipeline operators is how old are some of PHMSA's regulations. Key requirements for inspecting and repairing pipelines are now over 20 years old. The pipeline technologies and analytic methods on which they are based are woefully out of date, replaced by proven technologies and analytics and engineering methods that PHMSA should reflect in its regulations, but often does not. Congress in the 2020 Pipes Act, Section 104, authorized a pipeline safety technology demonstration program to demonstrate cutting-edge pipeline safety technologies and advanced analytics. Thank you, Congress. But PHMSA, in implementing the program, added a number of administrative hurdles and requirements beyond what Congress mandated, making the program untenable. We have proposals to unlock this program and others from unnecessary government red tape. Second, the pipeline industry supports updating regulatory requirements for low-carbon solutions. A major build-out of CO2 pipelines is necessary to transport CO2 from where it is captured to where we can store it permanently out of harm's way. Without a new network of CO2 pipelines, we will not meet our goals for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. There are already dozens of federal regulatory requirements administered by PHMSA covering CO2 pipeline safety, design, construction, operation, maintenance, pressure testing, and more. In a handful of discrete areas, PHMSA requirements would benefit from updates reflecting the latest safety approaches and learnings. We believe a targeted approach is the best way for PHMSA to issue new requirements quickly. This would also help PHMSA avoid getting bogged down in an open-ended exercise that, like other PHMSA rulemakings, can take many years. I'm happy to answer any questions, and I thank the subcommittee for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you, Mr. Black. Mr. Grubb, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Nels, Ranking Member Payne, and members of the subcommittee, good morning. My name is Kenneth Grubb, and I am the Chief Operating Officer for Natural Gas Pipelines at Kinder Morgan. As an engineer with over 30 years of experience in the pipeline sector, I appreciate the opportunity to testify before your subcommittee today. Kinder Morgan is one of the largest energy infrastructure companies in North America. We have an interest in or operate approximately 82,000 miles of pipeline that transport natural gas and other products that are essential to daily lives. Kinder Morgan is a member of the Interstate Natural Gas Association of America, also known as INGA, which is a trade association that represents the interstate natural gas pipeline and storage industry. I'm here today representing INGA. INGA's members transport the vast majority of the natural gas consumed in the United States through a network of approximately 200,000 miles of interstate transmission pipelines. These transmission pipelines are critical infrastructure systems spanning multiple states and deliver natural gas to end users such as local distribution companies, electricity generators, industrial manufacturers, and LNG export facilities. Natural gas is the cleanest burning fossil fuel, and as demand for energy increases, expanded use of natural gas has helped improve air quality across the country by offsetting the use of higher carbon-intensive fuels. According to the Energy Information Administration, between 2005 and 2019, carbon dioxide emissions from U.S. power sector declined by 33%. with natural gas accounting for more than half of those reductions. Additionally, INGA's members are committed to working together as an industry towards achieving net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. With that said, there are 4 key points I wish to make today. First, INGA's #1 priority is safety, and we support having a strong safety regulator. Regulators and industry experts alike, including the U.S. Department of Transportation and PHMSA, have agreed for decades that pipelines are the safest mode of energy transportation. Accidents are rare, and INGA's members are committed to making them increasingly infrequent. INGA's members work every day towards a goal of 0 pipeline incidents. To help achieve this goal, INGA fundamentally believes in having a strong safety regulator, and we also support robust, durable regulations written by PHMSA to ensure the safety of our nation's pipeline systems. Second, PHMSA should complete its work on the class location rulemaking and issue a final rule. INGA's top regulatory priority is completion of the class location rulemaking, which presents opportunities to increase safety and protect the environment. Existing regulations affecting this issue are over 50 years old. It is long overdue to update them to reflect modern safety technologies. Every year this regulation is not final, we estimate that 800 million standard cubic feet of natural gas is unnecessarily released to the atmosphere. Additionally, INGA members unnecessarily spend between 200 and 300 million per year to replace perfectly safe pipe. INGA is hopeful that PHMSA will quickly finalize this crucial rule. Third, the Gas Pipeline Advisory Committee, also known as GPAC, strengthens rulemakings and should meet more frequently. The GPAC, which provides technical safety guidance to PHMSA, is comprised of equal representation from the natural gas industry, federal and state agencies, and the public. Until recently, GPAC met frequently. However, since January 2021, the GPAC has only met once. With the known benefits of GPAC, INGA believes that Congress should consider requiring PHMSA to hold at least 2 GPAC meetings per year. Lastly, PHMSA should prioritize hiring safety engineers to assist with its rulemakings. INGA recognizes that pipeline safety regulations are complicated and often take years to write. To help assist with rulemaking backlogs that frequently occur, PHMSA should hire more safety engineers who already understand pipeline systems. This will result in more efficient process to produce effective rules. In conclusion, I truly appreciate the opportunity to testify in front of your subcommittee today. Your efforts are critical to ensuring PHMSA has the resources and direction necessary to continually improve safety in our industry. I look forward to your questions, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Grubb. Mr. Karam, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Nels, Ranking Member Payne, and members of the subcommittee for the opportunity to speak today on pipeline safety. My organization, the Pipeline Safety Trust, was formed after the devastating Olympic pipeline tragedy that stole the lives of 3 boys in Bellingham, Washington in 1999, a tragedy Ranking Member Larson so eloquently described. The U.S. Justice Department was so appalled at the operations of the pipeline company and the lax oversight from the federal government that they asked the federal courts to set aside money from the settlement to create the Pipeline Safety Trust as an independent national watchdog over the pipeline industry and its regulators. And it is with that spirit that I am speaking to you today. Everyone here today values safe communities, and we all share the goal of 0 incidents. However, pipeline failures continue unabated, and we now face a potential new generation of non-hydrocarbon pipelines, posing their own unique risks to our communities and making our goal of 0 incidents even further out of reach. Since the last pipeline safety legislation was passed in December of 2020, a bit over 2 years ago, our nation's pipelines have had over 1,300 reportable failures, more than 1 per day, killed or injured to the point of inpatient hospitalization 74 people, and caused nearly $1 billion in property damage. These failures include recent tragedies like the El Paso gas transmission pipeline explosion that killed 2, including a 14-year-old girl, and the Consumers Energy explosion in Flint, Michigan that killed 2, including a 3-year-old girl. And also many high-profile hazardous liquid failures, spilling millions of gallons of oil and gasoline into our rivers, oceans, and groundwater, including Colonial Pipeline's more than 2 million gallon gasoline spill in a nature preserve in Huntersville, North Carolina. To give a brief overview of our nation's state of pipeline safety, I'm sad to say that when looking at the data, we haven't made much progress. We can, of course, pick out time periods to show trends either going up or down. However, going back to 2010, which I believe to be an objective starting point, since that is when PHMSA changed some of its reporting criteria, incident trends on all categories of pipelines, including incidents impacting people or the environment, are statistically flat. We are not making progress. To start making a real difference on pipeline safety, Congress needs to remove the statutory handcuffs it's placed on the rules PHMSA can produce. PHMSA is the only agency with a statutory cost-benefit requirement, an especially difficult hurdle to clear for infrastructure with low probabilities of failure, yet enormously devastating consequences. PHMSA is also prohibited by statute from adopting design, initial testing, and construction standards that would apply to the existing 3 million miles of existing pipelines. Because of this non-application clause, PHMSA has been unable to require rupture mitigation valves in high-consequence areas, an NTSB recommendation after PG&E's pipeline tragedy in San Bruno, California in 2010. Of course, it is the aging infrastructure of existing pipelines that need this kind of life-saving technology the most. I want to take a moment to discuss one specific pipeline failure from 2020, a carbon dioxide pipeline operated by Denbury that failed near Satarsha, Mississippi. Carbon dioxide is an asphyxiant that is heavier than air and can therefore travel in dangerous and even lethal concentrations for long distances, displacing oxygen. Nearly the entire community of 200 in Satarsha was evacuated, with 45 of them seeking treatment at the hospital. Residents lost consciousness, had seizures, foamed at the mouth. First responders heroically pulled many to safety while donning scuba gear, probably saving lives, their truck engines unable to operate in the oxygen-deprived environment. The community of Satarsha is incredibly lucky to not have suffered any fatalities. As Congress has highly incentivized carbon capture and sequestration, communities are looking at a potentially enormous build-out of CO2 pipelines. Currently relatively rare and remote, experts are predicting a future with 20 times or more the amount of CO2 pipelines and much closer to communities. On top of this, they are dangerously unregulated. Current PHMSA standards only regulate CO2 pipelines if in a supercritical fluid with more than 90% purity. Therefore, gas and liquid CO2 pipelines are unregulated. Many man-made sources of CO2 can have much higher levels of impurities that pose public health and pipeline integrity issues such as corrosion. There are no PHMSA standards on levels of these dangerous impurities. Congress should mandate that PHMSA regulate these and the other equally frightening regulatory gaps that need to be addressed before the public can have any kind of confidence in a potential national build-out of CO2 pipelines. In order to honor the value we place on safe communities, Congress needs to give PHMSA more authority, more resources, and implement the safety recommendations I have detailed in my written testimony. Thank you again for inviting me to testify today. I look forward to answering any questions the subcommittee may have and helping Congress improve the nation's state of pipeline safety.
Thank you, Mr. Karam. And I want to thank you all the witnesses here for your testimony. We will now turn to questions from the panel, and I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes. Administrator Brown, the Pipes Act 2020 was signed on December 27th of 2020. Included in the legislation was a requirement that PHMSA modernize its regulations to accommodate the growing LNG export industry. The proposed rule has not yet been published. What is PHMSA's path for the promulgation of these regulations?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. That rule is a priority rulemaking, both one of the many in the 2020 Pipes Act, as well as far as our monthly updated web chart showing what our priority rulemakings are. And we hope to get a proposal out this year on that. I was just down in Freeport, Texas, where we had a really terrible incident last year in June. We hope to incorporate lessons learned from that incident in that rulemaking. I'll just note, too, that in the first year of this administration, we had the most productive series of pipeline safety rulemakings in the last 12 years, and maybe beyond that. So we're making tremendous progress, but I agree, and I think a theme for the whole day today and at the last hearing held on regarding PHMSA is that our pace of rulemakings is not what anybody in the room would like it to be. And so we're excited to work with any and all of you to help improve that ability to get rulemakings done.
And Mr. Brown, we understand PHMSA has long dealt with staffing challenges, which is why the PIPES Act of 2020 mandated that enforcement and inspection personnel not fall below a certain number. Yet as of January 21st, PHMSA has only 207 inspection and enforcement personnel, despite the PIPES Act requiring 247 such employees. I think Mr. Grubb was talking a little bit about this, hiring people, safety personnel for 2023. Instead of filling these essential positions, PHMSA has hired environmental specialists, including an environmental economist, that do not appear directly tied to its pipeline safety mission. You have also referred to PHMSA as a climate change agency. Considering the agency's current challenges in meeting its pipeline safety mission, do you think rebranding PHMSA as a climate change agency is helpful in recruiting safety and inspection personnel?
Well, so yes. In fact, when I asked new hires why they came to the agency, and a lot of them actually reference that. I actually asked CEOs of companies, and would be interested to hear the representatives here, but the CEOs of oil and gas pipeline companies also cite their focus on climate change over recent years to attract engineers, PhDs, to their agency to be a part of the transition and to mitigate one of the big challenges. I'm glad to get you updated numbers on where we are. My understanding is we've actually met PIPES Act mandates in hiring new inspectors and engineers over the last few years. It's been our top focus. We can't do the work without the incredibly dedicated people we have. Certainly during the pandemic and over the last few years, the challenges of competing with the private sector, with other states, it is a challenge. I just heard from one of our state agents that they had 4 people they were interviewing, nobody showed up for the interview. That's a real challenge, and any tools you can give us to help us get to that.
I appreciate that,
would be
Mr. Brown. It's been over 2 years without a nominee for PHMSA administrator. How has the absence of permanent leadership affected the agency's regulatory efficiency?
Honestly, I don't think one bit, but I don't have too much to add.
Has there been any discussion when a nominee's coming forward? I mean, when are we going to?
I don't have any. I don't have any estimates or information.
All right. Last question, and again, in the PIPES Act of 2020, signed on December 27th, 2020, included in the legislation was a requirement that PHMSA modernize its regulations to accommodate the growing LNG export industry. The proposed rule has not yet been established again. What is PHMSA's path forward for the promulgation of these regulations?
This door shut when you started. Is this the LNG facilities update rule? The one I think you first asked about, our plan is to get it out this year, and we provide monthly updates on progress there.
Well, I'm looking forward to, we had a meeting a few weeks ago. I look forward to, continue on with this relationship so we can do the right thing and make sure that our pipelines are as safe as can be. Thank you. I will now recognize our Ranking Member Payne for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Deputy Administrator Brown, in February of 2020, Denbury's 24-inch carbon dioxide pipe ruptured in Mississippi with 200 people needing to be evacuated, as it was just stated. Fortunately, there were no fatalities, but local first responders were caught completely unaware. Can you please share with us how PHMSA is using lessons learned from this incident to inform your ongoing carbon dioxide rule development?
Really important question, and I just want to relate it back to the chairman's comments about the LNG facilities rule and discussions you have frequently with industry. But in that incident that you referenced, and I visited community, about 70 people in rural Mississippi, about an hour northwest of Jackson. The first responders were unaware of the incident and what was at issue with the rupture of that carbon dioxide pipeline. Notification and getting information out, same thing in East Palestine, Ohio. We live in modern society where I can get notification of my food order that it's being, it's been retained by the restaurant. They're cooking my food. It's ready to go. that's all within minutes. And in that incident, it was over an hour and a half before folks were aware that there was a cloud of CO2 gas that was engulfing a community. We can do much better than that. Really look forward to working with everybody, and I think there is consensus on the need to improve that communication.
Thank you. As we look forward to pipeline safety reauthorization, do you feel that PHMSA has the resources needed to investigate all pipeline incidents? And what additional tools do you need to recruit and retain an inspection workforce?
We triage our needs. I think we have requisite resources to investigate pipeline incidents, but the amount of time it can take, we actually have reduced the amount of time to open, certainly for an enforcement and compliance issue related to an incident, to record low amount of 323 days. So the amount of resources we have, and that seems to be a common theme for the day, is directly proportional to the work that we can do. And everybody seems to think we should be doing more. We're grateful that this committee has continued to support our work, but it's an important question you ask.
Yeah, that's the unfortunate position you're in. People are, irrespective of what you do, people are always going to want more. So, thank you. Now, Mr. Karam, your testimony says that we are not making real progress on pipeline safety and that integrity management programs have not lived up to their promise. What were those shortcomings what are the shortcomings of the integrity management plans?
Thank you for the question. Yes, the theory behind integrity management, really makes perfect sense. You identify those pipelines that can have the most devastating effects on communities or on the environment in the case of a failure, and you focus your safety efforts on those section of pipelines with more inspections, more safety requirements. However, and we identify those areas, we call them high consequence areas. But when we look at the data and we look at incident rates within high consequence areas and compare them to the incidents outside of high consequence areas, they're not doing any better. In a lot of cases, they're actually doing worse. And so we see this as a performance-based metric, performance-based regulation that leaves a lot up to the operator's discretion. It makes it hard for PHMSA to inspect, hard for them to enforce, and it's not producing the results that we would hope to see as safety advocates.
And with the time that I have remaining, what is the single biggest driver of the lack of progress on pipeline safety?
Thank you for the question. It's a good one. I would have to say PHMSA's statutory handcuffs on ability to make strong rules.
Okay. Thank you very much. And Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Payne. And Mr. Brown, in your testimony, it says PHMSA has kept up with the Pipes Act of 2020 hiring mandates, both for inspectors as well as regulatory personnel. And in your office, January 31st, says 207 of the 248 inspection enforcement personnel were filled. So you, obviously in the last 5 weeks, 6 weeks, you have hired 41 personnel. I find that incredible with the bureaucracy and the stuff that we have today. But I will now yield to Mr. Rouser.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Brown, this is not a gotcha question by any means. I'm just curious how you'll answer it. Generally speaking, are pipelines safe?
Are pipelines safe? Generally speaking, sure.
Let me ask this. Are investigations common when there's no safety incident?
Could you repeat the question? I didn't hear.
I'm sorry. Are investigations common when there's no safety incident?
Are investigations common when there is no safety incident? Not common, no.
Okay. Follow up to that, what circumstances would prompt PHMSA to launch an investigation on a wireline or slickline operator that's never had a recorded safety incident?
Perhaps a notification through anonymous sources or through, you know, a hotline. You know, there are many circumstances where you might investigate an allegation of a company or an operator, sure.
So let me ask it this way. Is there any kind of testing available for a regulated wireline or slick line operator where they can be exempt from, quite frankly, unapplicable regulations imposed upon them?
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble hearing.
Is there any kind of testing or process available for a regulated wireline or slick line operator to be exempt from unapplicable regulations that might be imposed upon them? In other words, is there a process where you check all the boxes, you're clear to go, without having to go through an investigation when in fact there is no safety incident?
You'd never be totally exempt from, just if you check boxes, you know, you say you're meeting our requirements. I mean, we're always going to make sure what you say is accurate and operators held accountable if it's not.
One other question here. So what kind of research, if there is any, that PHMSA is conducting related to pipelines and the products that support pipelines?
A tremendous amount of research, actually, and actually gets to Mr. Black's testimony about our commitment to innovation. We spend millions of dollars a year working with academic community, the regulated community on the needs to improve pipeline safety and technologies. Actually, a bunch of patents come out of the research that the Congress appropriates and that we dole out to those communities.
Is that research available to the public?
It is, yeah.
Where can that be found?
We can send it to you, but it's on our website.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how many different research projects are there out there?
I mean, I want to say at least a dozen. We've got about $8 million currently on some of the new emerging areas of energy, hydrogen, carbon dioxide, both to mitigate safety risks, to improve leak detection, to keep the product in the pipe, which I think everybody here is focused on. So that's an area that I think, you know, we have a really broad stakeholder support for and engagement with.
With regard to my earlier questions, later on, I'd like for my team to get with your team to talk about some specific incidents. Just make sure that you're aware and that all things are being handled properly.
Happy to. Really appreciate your flagging that. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. I yield back.
Mr. Rouser yields. I'll now recognize Mr. Larson for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The strengthening pipeline safety protects our communities. We know that in Washington State. It also holds operators accountable. In the future, it can help us fight climate change with the role of moving CO2 around. I think we need to focus on better identifying our vulnerabilities, addressing safety gaps, and giving PHMSA the tools it needs to strengthen safety standards. And to that end, Mr. Karam, your testimony outlines a variety of things, but one point you make is that integrity management isn't working. I've been at this 23 years. Many have been on at this longer, but it was always about integrity management when we did the Pipeline Safety Act in 2002 and continuing on. But in your view, why isn't integrity management working, and what is the biggest contributor to the pipeline safety challenges that you've identified?
Thank you for the question. I wish I could list off a number of reasons of why it's not working.
You get to pick one.
I believe it's the performance-based nature of them and the lack of prescriptions. For a lot of there's a lot of wonderful operators out there that really are leading the way on safety. They take it very seriously. It's a part of their culture. And I would imagine that those operators have pretty good integrity management programs. Unfortunately, those are not all the operators out there. And for those, I think we do need some more prescriptive level of minimum safety standards, which would allow the other operators to continue to doing their integrity management programs, their safety management systems, and these continuous improvement processes.
Yeah, you've identified a lot of about 22 recommendations or so in your testimony. Appreciate that. Are there any new approaches you think would best move the needle to improve safety?
overall, I think the best thing we can do for safety is give PHMSA the full resources it needs to be the regulator it needs to be. I think they've been historically, it's a theme today among all of us, they've been historically underfunded. They have these statutory handcuffs, and if Congress could give them the tools, the resources, and the ability to become a more robust regulatory agency, I think that's where we'll see a real change in pipeline safety and start to move towards our goals.
Yeah. Mr. Brown, I've been around long enough to not ask you specifically what's going to be the president's budget tomorrow because I know what your answer will be. You won't be able to give it. Should we expect to see something in the president's budget tomorrow with regards to PHMSA and the resources you've outlined that are needed?
Yes, thank you for the question and how you asked it. There's a couple things that I can highlight without specificity, and one is support for states. You know, we oversee 3.4 million miles of pipeline, but a vast majority of those are gas distribution, and 80% of those are overseen by our state agents. They have gotten about 55% of their budgets covered through appropriations that you all provide us to give to them. That is, with all the new demands on us and on them, that's hefty, and so we are trying to address that in the budget. And then in addition to that, hydrogen, CO2, the fuels of the future that have greatly been incentivized in the last 2 years through the Inflation Reduction Act and Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. The one thing that sort of was missing from those tremendous investments was additional oversight by our agency. So the president's budget should reflect those items I can preview for you.
All right, and we'll look for those, especially. Mr. Black, could you, we talked a little bit yesterday about the technology demonstration. Could you talk a little bit more about that? I mean, it certainly sounds interesting. Want to move forward. Certainly in the last 25 years, technology's changed. I understand the technology of a smart pig hasn't changed. It's a matter of, think of that as a platform, and then the stuff you stick on it, if you will, the technology has changed to better do integrity management. Can you talk a little bit more about the program itself and how it can benefit?
Sure. Thank you, Ranking Member. Yeah. Yes, the smart pig technology or inline inspection is the same as maybe 20 years ago, but the sophistication of the devices that can travel inside the pipeline looking for issues have improved. So have the analytics of what can be done with that information. We can see more. We have a better idea of what issues might become a problem. So we know now through greater advancements what the proper schedule should be on which features a pipeline operator should address. But the PHMSA regulations have not changed that. So Congress, in recognition, created this section in the Pipes Act 2020, right? That sounded great. But what PHMSA did is they went beyond the mandate and the limitations imposed by Congress. First, they required that an application to use it follow the NEPA process, and an environmental assessment was done. That's the first time PHMSA's ever done that for an R&D project. They said the standard of review needed to be higher even than the special permit process. And the special permit is for a permanent waiver of regulations. This is for a temporary project. And then PHMSA said that anybody asking for a demonstration project needed to use the special permit process itself, which has taken 10 years in some instances.
Thank you. A follow-up, and I appreciate the chair's indulgence, and I have nothing to yield back except nothing. Thank you.
Mr. Larson yields. I now recognize Mr. Stauber for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Mr. Larson, thanks for yielding your time to me. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, in recent years, I'm sure everyone has seen the illegal protesters that have set fires, cut hydraulic lines, attacked equipment and operators during the Enbridge Line 3 replacement construction. And they did millions of dollars of damage and put union workers in danger. Deputy Administrator Brown, are our pipelines, the critical infrastructure used to deliver affordable and reliable energy to my constituents in Minnesota, are they safe from radical protesters?
Congressman, as you and others may know, we don't oversee security of pipelines. So when you say safe, our jurisdiction does include the safe operations, but the line is sort of drawn as far as security to the Transportation Security Administration. We do work closely with them, and when we see issues of security, we let them know. and vice versa. If they have issues with security, they flag those issues as they may affect operations.
When they have, when these protesters are protesting for climate reasons, obviously, do they put the workers in jeopardy?
Again, because we focus on the safe operations of the pipelines and not on the security, I'm certainly concerned always about the workers doing work.
But do they put the workers in jeopardy when they jump into pipes as the 49ers are lifting that pipe up into place? Does that put them in jeopardy?
I mean, that sounds very concerning to me, sure.
Does it put the community in jeopardy?
All of that, what you're describing sounds very concerning and putting
Does
in
it put law
jeopardy, sure.
enforcement in jeopardy?
The way you're describing things, that does sound like it puts everybody in jeopardy if you're threatening violence to anybody or anything.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. In your testimony, you had stated that that PHMSA is a climate agency. Do you still stand by that?
Yeah, thanks for giving me the opportunity to explain that.
Do you sympathize with the radical protesters?
I don't know to what you're referring.
Protesters, for instance, on Enbridge Line 3, they were climate protesters. Do you sympathize with them?
That is a large group of people who I don't know exactly what you're referring to, sort of I really just don't know what you're referring to. So
Do you support their radical protests that put the workers, community, and law enforcement in danger?
I do not support anybody putting anybody in danger, especially law enforcement. My dad was a police officer. I come from a law enforcement family.
That should have been easier for you to answer then.
Well, I think I answered the easy ones.
Are the Biden administration's climate priorities driving decisions at PHMSA? Yes or no?
We have a whole of government approach to mitigating the threat of climate change, which I think everybody up here is aligned with, and appreciate the Bipartisan Pipes Act focus on minimizing methane emissions, which has 80 times the global warming potential as carbon dioxide.
Ultimately, I'm concerned that this administration is steering PHMSA away from its mission and using yet another agency to push its activist agenda. PHMSA's mission is to protect people and the environment by advancing the safe transportation of energy and other materials that are essential to our daily lives. Reliable, affordable, clean energy is good. Would you agree with that?
I would agree that reliable, affordable, clean energy is good. I think our mission statement also includes protecting the environment, and we also focus on that as well, and appreciate the committee supporting that as well.
All the American people want is safe, reliable access to affordable energy. We need to protect our pipeline infrastructure to accomplish that goal. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
I agree. Thank you, Congressman.
Mr. Stauber yields. I now recognize Ms. Fushi for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses for being here this morning. I'd also like to thank Ranking Member Larson and Ranking Member Payne for their work, and I'm honored to join both of you and my colleagues on this subcommittee. First, I'd like to discuss the Colonial Pipeline spill that happened in Huntersville, North Carolina. In August of 2020, gasoline was found bubbling from the ground on the Ayler Nature Preserve in Huntersville. At first, the Colonial Pipeline estimated that only 63,000 gallons had leaked, but ultimately it was reported that nearly 2 million gallons of fuel was released in the Nature Preserve, resulting in my state's largest gasoline spill ever. Last summer, the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality filed a consent order holding Colonial Pipeline accountable after they failed to provide the state with essential information required for remediation after the spill. It took 2 years and a consent order. Mr. Brown, in May 2022, your agency proposed nearly $1 million in civil penalties on Colonial Pipeline for multiple probable violations of federal pipeline safety regulations for failing to adequately plan and prepare for a manual restart and shutdown operation, which contributed to the national impacts of the May 2021 cyber attack. So my question is whether PHMSA's civil penalty authority is substantial enough to encourage better behavior by pipeline operators.
That's a really good question. I don't know if I have a great answer. Would welcome other panelists to answer of whether a civil penalty of $1 million is going to dissuade a company that's, you know, valued in the billions. I think intuitively, I would think not. But I'll say, you know, we specifically highlighted that proposed civil penalty because it was something where we had actually given the company a heads up, hey, you've got to fix this, and they chose not to after we even told them to adhere to our regulations. So that, for us, that's a particularly egregious violation, and that's why we issued a proposed civil penalty.
Thank you for that response. Mr. Grubb and Mr. Black, I'm interested in learning more about how you detect and prevent leaks in your industry. Is this a priority for Kinder Morgan, Mr. Grubb, and for your member organizations, Mr. Black? Do you have a means of detecting leakage on your pipelines, and are your systems for doing so more stringent in high population areas, also known as high consequence areas? Mr. Grubb, you may go first.
Thank you for the question. So in terms of detecting methane leaks, we routinely patrol our pipelines for leak detection purposes. We also implement leak detection at compressor stations along our pipeline routes. Detecting leaks is important. It is something that that does not happen often in terms of natural gas pipeline leaks, but when it does happen, we quickly identify it and we quickly repair those. Methane emissions in general is something that is of the utmost importance to us, as well as our industry, and certainly PHMSA acting upon the rulemaking to address class location will also minimize or reduce methane emissions associated with activities that are required to meet the current regulations, and that being pipe replacement, and it will minimize the unnecessary release of natural gas associated with those projects, and that will go a long ways in reducing methane emissions as well.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Detecting leaks is very important. A pipeline operator's goal is to detect the leak available in the control room where you can shut down the pipe at the sign. So they maintain sensors along a pipeline looking for signs of a leak. Industry in the last several years has developed through experts a recommended practice at the American Petroleum Institute on leak detection. We're also conducting R&D to continue to improve leak detection. We want to be able to see, smell, or hear maybe the signs of released product. Also maintain those aerial patrols, just like Mr. Grubb was saying, and have community awareness programs so that if the public knows, if they find an incident of a leak, they know who to call. Detecting leaks is very important.
Thank you. With that, Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Ms. Fushi yields. I will now recognize Mr. Johnson for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was grateful to see that Ranking Member Larson had focused a little bit on the technology pilot program. And so, Mr. Brown, Mr. Black, I want to dive a little deeper. I mean, talk to me about what improvements we could make to the program so that it would be more valuable for operators and more people would take advantage of it.
You want me to go ahead? Okay. Thank you. Nobody has used the program right now. It's been untenable. We need to make some changes. One, we need to change the standard of review. It's complicated in the law. It's complicated in what PHMSA has done. Generally, we want something simple where it's a reasonable level of safety compared to what the existing regulations have. Second, we don't
So hold on, before going to second, let's drill in just a little bit. So when you say we need to change the standard of review, you know, what is it and where do we need to head to?
Problem is that PHMSA is using a standard review even higher than its special permit process, which is for permanent waivers of regulations. It doesn't need to be that way. Shall I move to another one?
What standard should they move to? Should they just move to their standard level of review?
We want PHMSA to exercise judgment on if this application is going to improve pipeline safety.
I see.
This is PHMSA's decision to make. They've made it more complicated than they need to.
Okay, very good. Sorry, number one, now number two.
Great. Next, we need to not use the NEPA process. There's no reason for an environmental assessment to be completed for an R&D project. Next, we need to not use the special permit process itself. It's broken. Everybody recognizes that. It's taken 10 years for some special permits. Next, we need to extend this program. Congress gave it a few years. We've lost 2 years already. Do a 10-year reauthorization so we have the full cycle of PHMSA to finish developing the updates, operators to apply. Let's conduct the research. PHMSA can get the data. The goal is for them to update their regulations with the know-how of 20 years of developments.
That's excellent, because those are specific changes that we can make. They're within our power, they're easy to understand, and they would have the desired impact. Sir, what did he get wrong?
So we actually opened for public comment. How can we implement this directive from Congress? We didn't get the specifics of exactly your question, Congressman. What standard do we judge a new technology? If it's just an R&D project, that's different than deploying a technology that has safety implications for the public. I rely on the subject matter experts whose focus is safety to make that determination. Now, the question of how to apply the National Environmental Policy Act, that's a directive that Congress established, 50 plus years ago. When you can consider environmental impacts in different ways, but there was no proposal to provide those environmental impacts at all in the public comment period that we offered. So we want innovative technologies. We were happy to work with folks on this. That's why we opened it up for public comment. Happy to work with LIPA and any of the committee members here. But we don't want to sacrifice two things, right? Safety, environmental impacts. So how to do it is absolutely the question. You asked the right question. We're asking the same question. And if we can come to agreement on an efficient way to do it, great. It is definitely a common goal that we have.
Mr. Black, what else?
PHMSA has recognized that a decision on a pipeline safety demonstration program application is not a major federal action. It has the discretion to not put it through the NEPA process. This can be simple. Congress can tell PHMSA, don't go beyond the limitations that we tell you to use in this program.
Well,
So,
we
Mr.
certainly,
No, go ahead, sir.
Say we certainly potentially could face a lawsuit and then have to litigate that if Congress were to provide us directives, or if we could get a proposal that says, we're not going to ignore the environmental impacts. Here's how you know we're not going to ignore the environmental impacts. Then that would get us closer to what I think we all want to get to.
So, Mr. Chairman, I would just close by saying this. I mean, we have specific recommendations. We have an opportunity to make this program work better, to get additional research and development, to make the system run better and more safely. It's not being used properly. This is something we can work on together. This is something that we might be able to get the overwhelming majority of the people on both sides of this dais to understand that the reforms that have been described will work and they'll make the system better long term. Let's get it done together. I yield back.
Mr. Johnson yields. I now recognize Mr. Cohen for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I thank you and the ranking member for holding this hearing. The safe operation of the 3.4 million miles of pipeline regulated by PHMSA is vital to the health and safety of the American people. I want to focus on a pipeline issue that is particularly important to our country's ability to combat the climate crisis, which is methane leaks. According to a recent report in a Guardian article, methane causes about a quarter of global heating from the greenhouse gas effect. And human-caused emissions over the last century have contributed about a third of the total global temperature rise. Emissions have surged in recent decades, and if we continue on this path, methane alone could push us past a number of catastrophic climate tipping points. Around 40% of those methane emissions come from leaks from fossil fuel exploration, production, and transportation, and that percentage has increased by half in the last 2 decades. For the sake of the planet and future generations, we must do all we can to prevent methane leaks from the millions of miles of natural gas pipelines under PHMSA's authority. In my state, the Tennessee Valley Authority is pushing forward with a plan to construct new natural gas power plants and pipelines as a, quote, bridge, unquote, to renewables, a bridge to renewables. I have argued that it is a bridge to more pollution and disasters, and I strongly encourage them to rethink this approach. Deputy Administrator Brown, in your written testimony, you stated that PHMSA has been integral to the whole of government approach to mitigating unnecessary greenhouse gas emissions. Could you expand on what this approach entails and what resources or support PHMSA might still need to properly carry out this vital mission?
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Congressman. Really, we've been really energized by this committee's work with the 2020 Pipes Act, which said regulated facilities have to minimize methane emissions, as noted, 80 times the global warming potential is carbon dioxide. Also, we have to include in our cost-benefit analysis as we move forward with rulemakings, environmental impacts, which just gets to some of the questions from members today, why we might hire people with environmental knowledge and skills. We've been directed to do that by the committee in carrying out these directives, and we're doing it actually by hiring engineers with environmental knowledge and experience. But we've got 6 rulemakings in the White House Methane Reduction Action Plan. 3 of them we finalized, and those overlap to the chairman's questions about how we're prioritizing. We're prioritizing the directives we have from Congress to do a host of rulemakings, the ones that have the biggest safety impact, that also, I think it's inextricably linked. If you reduce methane emissions, you're actually improving and mitigating climate change. You're mitigating methane emissions. When you keep the product in the pipe, which is something you hear from industry all the time, we're all, I think, focused on that and how we talk about it. And I suggest, we talk about it. I suggest we talk about keeping the product in the pipe is helping reduce methane emissions and global warming. The agency that I lead now wasn't allowed to talk about that for 4 years. And a lot of companies are talking about it now to recruit folks, and also because their investors want that information. So really over the last few years, the marketplace, the free market has said, yeah, actually we'd like to have improved clean energy, but we also want to mitigate the impacts to the environment.
Our time is running out. If I can, I thank you for that. Very quickly, could operators decide for themselves which high consequence area definitions to use? Why do we have 2 different definitions, and do we allow operators to pick and choose even different ones along the same route?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
Well, I've got a minute left. I'm going to pass. Mr. Karam, in your written testimony, you state that natural gas regulations drafted before the collective consensus that methane emissions are a major contributor to climate change are extremely permissible with regard to leak reporting requirements. You and Deputy Administrator Brown, methane is a potent greenhouse gas. We want to avoid it leaking from pipelines. PHMSA has just finished a year-long study to put together a proposed rule on the use of advanced leak detection. Where are we tackling methane emissions from natural gas pipelines, and what still needs to be done?
Thank you for that question. As Mr. Brown stated, Congress made extraordinary progress in this area with the Pipes Act of 2020, but we still do have a lot of work to do. We now have satellites detecting huge methane plumes from planned and routine maintenance from pipelines. We don't tolerate these kind of planned intentional releases from liquid pipelines, and we need to continue this culture change on the gas side and no longer tolerate those as well. These blowdowns, the intentional releases for routine maintenance, they're not required to be reported to PHMSA, and besides the general language in the Pipes Act about minimizing emissions, there's no limitation on them.
Mr. Brown, do you have something to add?
Yeah, we have a rulemaking that's at the Office of Management and Budget that addresses leak detection, repair, blowdowns, basically the items you just addressed, Congressman, and that's a mandate from the 2020 Pipes Act.
Thank you, sir, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Cohen. I now recognize Mr. Yakum for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for taking the time to be here today and share with us your expertise. I'm glad that our Transportation Infrastructure Committee kicked off our first hearing on the FAA reauthorization with a hearing concerned and centered around safety. And I'm glad that we're doing the same thing with PHMSA today with the reauthorization, a hearing on safety. Pipelines are the lifeblood of our economy. They help put gas in our vehicles, they heat our homes, they power our factories and our businesses, and they drive exports that lift our economy and create jobs right here at home. They're an integral part of the conversion or conversation as we discuss emerging technologies like hydrogen and carbon capture as well. At the heart of all these applications is safety. Without pipeline safety, Americans won't have gas, heat, power, or exports that we depend on to drive our economy on a daily basis. That's why we have agencies like PHMSA, the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, which is entrusted with this critical mission of safety. But I'm concerned because it seems like there's a potential movement to deviate from that mission of safety. We heard earlier today about a number of pipeline issues that have happened, safety issues across our country, and it seems like we may have a deviation from that mission of safety. Mr. Brown, you recently said, and I quote, "One thing we're trying to brand is as a climate agency." I'd like you to clarify that comment because Congress created PHMSA to be a safety agency, not a climate agency, full stop. So if you could, for the record, Mr. Brown, please clarify, is PHMSA's top and sole priority safety?
Yes, it is. And, it is the top priority, but it is inextricably linked to environmental impacts. And that is in our mission statement, and it is in the 2020 Pipes Act for us to minimize methane emissions. Methane being 80 times the impact of carbon dioxide and global warming. When you minimize methane emissions, you're mitigating climate change. Now, you can talk about it or you can not talk about it. I choose to talk about it, but when you minimize methane emissions, and by the way, most of the companies that Mr. Black represents, Mr. Grubb, his company, they talk about what they're doing to mitigate climate change. It's inextricably linked to safety, and so to just not talk about it, I mean, it's up to folks who want to talk about it. I choose to talk about it. I think it's good for recruiting. It happens to be accurate, and we're acknowledging the reality that climate change exists, and we have to consider ways to mitigate it.
Do you think that some of the pipeline safety issues we've had have happened because maybe we've taken our eye off the ball of safety and we're focused more on climate change, it seems, than we are on safety, which is the responsibility of your agency?
There's 600 people completely dedicated to safety. You couldn't convince them not to be focused on safety. First thing I did was, what are the rulemakings that will have the biggest safety impact at the agency? And that's what we're focused on.
Talk to me about how your agency speaks to recruits. I mean, do you tell your recruits that you're a climate agency that's concerned about safety?
I mean, as far as what we recruit, we post our jobs. I don't think most of them mention climate change, but through our social media, through hearings like this, we're trying to note, hey, if you want to make a difference, and when you talk to people under the age of 30, 35, they really care about making a difference in the world and leaving something better for the next generation. It's different than what people in the 35 to 45 care about, or the 55 to 65. We're trying to, and we want to recruit from the biggest pool of people that we possibly can to get the best engineers, best safety experts, and if that can provide a little bit of difference and get us a little bit more folks to address the chairman's comments from earlier of how to recruit people, great.
How would you rate the considerations in hiring when you're considering between safety considerations in hiring versus climate considerations in hiring?
Well, for the vast majority of our positions, safety is integral. We have a few positions. We started off with less than one position at an agency of 600 people who has in its mission statement environmental impacts. We had less than one focused on National Environmental Policy Act implementation with respect to our agency. We now have three and change. One person who's straight out of college, right? I mean, we've not revamped our agency of 600 people with 3 people. We just now are able to carry out the laws that you've given us to carry out, which include environmental impacts.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. With that, Mr. Garcia, your 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and the ranking member, for holding this hearing. This committee, of course, has a responsibility to ensure the safety of our transit and infrastructure systems, and this hearing is critical to ensuring that we provide that safety. There is currently a proposal to build a 1,300-mile pipeline to transport liquefied CO2 across 4 Midwestern states, with Illinois serving as the endpoint and storage facility. The building of this pipeline will cause significant safety concerns, and to date, there are no plans from PHMSA to update CO2 safety regs until 2024. Mr. Brown, regulators are behind on all these issues, and given past mismanagement, why would we trust corporations to come up with their own appropriate safety standards?
I don't think we should trust anyone. I think we should put rules in place and standards in place, regulations in place that are foolproof, that don't involve trusting, but involve meeting standards. And we are planning to promulgate a draft rule in the coming months. I think that'll set the standard and bar for the projects you referenced.
And as the pipeline goes, shouldn't we hold off on construction?
That's not a question that Congress has given to my agency to make any sort of determination. I can just tell you we're racing to get these rules out, to make them as strong as possible. We've got input from, I think, folks across the panel here to acknowledge that, and a consensus that there need to be updates to the rules.
Fair enough. And my next question, Mr. Brown, is this. If we don't have definitive standards for how far plumes go or how far back setbacks should be, how can we accurately regulate for the health and safety of those nearby?
That's something we hope to address in our rulemaking.
Why would we put this technology in place, risking lives without adequate research or protections in place?
Well, so just for clarification, we've had carbon dioxide pipelines around for decades, and it was incentivized in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act as well as the Inflation Reduction Act because of the climate change challenge that we face, and this being one of the potential solutions. The challenge that I hope everybody in the room can help us focus on, which is how to make sure it works, how to make sure it works safely, because of its potential to reduce climate change impacts.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I yield the balance of my time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Garcia. With that, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Babin, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. Thank all of you witnesses for being here. Pipelines are the backbone of our energy infrastructure. The United States is the largest network of energy pipelines in the world. My home state of Texas has the highest total pipeline mileage by far. And while there is certainly room for improvement, studies prove that pipelines are also the cheapest, the most environmentally friendly, and the safest way to transport oil and gas and other products. However, given the Biden administration's actions to shut down pipeline projects, like the Keystone XL pipeline that they killed back in 2021, you would think that it was just the opposite. Why would President Biden shoot down a cheaper, cleaner, safer way to move our petroleum products? A project that supports our national security and energy goals? It's a great question and one we ought to be asking ourselves every single day. But moving forward, we've got to be sure that Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration is fully equipped and prepared to oversee current and future pipelines, and they also need to be laser-focused on safety, not environmental advocacy or anti-corporate litigation efforts. So, Deputy Administrator Brown, due to the growing size of the liquefied natural gas, or LNG, market and its importance for both domestic and international relations, PHMSA will need to step up its important safety role to oversee this industry. One proposal is that PHMSA institute an LNG separate center of excellence at a new location as discussed in its report to Congress under Model 3. Model 3 appears to provide comprehensive benefits to directly align industry, stakeholders, and industry in the continued growth of the domestic LNG export facilities. If PHMSA does not intend to pursue Model 3, how will it make up for the shortfalls and gaps in knowledge that would occur?
This is with regards to the creation of the LNG Center of Excellence.
That's Model 3. That's what, I think you mentioned that in your opening statement, did you not?
Yeah, I don't think Model 3 was in my opening statement, but
Okay, well,
we
I'm
did
sorry.
get appropriated $8.4 million just a few months ago to create the LNG Center of Excellence. And so we are well on our way in developing that model, but don't have anything to report yet as far as where and some of the specifications of what that will look like. But it is something that we're grateful that Congress has appropriated this funding to help improve the safety and environmental performance of LNG facilities.
Okay, well, I got another question, time permitting. Federal permitting process for energy infrastructure projects is complex, often triggering the jurisdiction of multiple federal agencies and reviews. This is especially true for large-scale LNG projects where PHMSA provides the regulatory expertise on safe design and operations, yet FERC holds the authority to authorize the construction of these projects. I understand that often because of a lack of coordination between the agencies, project developers, despite going through a multi-year design process, are then questioned and then forced to redesign existing facilities to satisfy the evolving demands of federal inspectors and regulators. What is your agency doing to improve this coordination and to help shorten the permitting process so that some of these projects can move forward, especially in an era of shortfalls of energy?
Yeah, no, thank you. An important question. While we don't have, as you recognize, permitting authority, we do work closely with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. I was actually just down in Freeport, Texas, where the site of an incident last year, a 450-foot-high fireball, an explosion at that facility. We want to learn from those mistakes and make sure we don't have that type of incident ever again. And so we had, for the last 9 months, met on a weekly basis with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission as well as the U.S. Coast Guard to basically not sort of stay in our lanes, but instead work more closely, as you described, to identify any potential areas of risk, whether it's in our lane or their lane typically, and work more robustly to identify those items up front in that process.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Babin. We now turn to the new member from New Jersey, Mr. Menendez. Sir, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank my friend, Ranking Member Payne. Deputy Administrator Brown, as you know, we've seen increasingly sophisticated cyber attacks on our transportation infrastructure, including our pipeline systems. Keeping our pipeline secure is critical to the safety and well-being of the communities we represent. Can you speak to some of the cyber threats PHMSA grapples with and what the interagency process for dealing with these attacks looks like?
I can speak a little bit, but just for everybody's benefit, Congress has not given us authority to oversee cybersecurity of pipelines. Transportation Security Administration does do that, but we do work very closely with them. Prior to the Colonial Pipeline cyber attack, we would engage voluntarily, invite our regulated entities, pipeline operators, to discuss their cyber plans because, as we experienced when that incident occurred, there are operational impacts when you have potentially when you have a cyber attack, and we're responsible for safe operations. Ultimately, the companies are always responsible for safe operations, but we're responsible for overseeing that. And so prior to that incident, we had about 50% of our regulated entities engage in those discussions. Post that incident, we had about 100% of entities engaged on that. So we've provided our input to the Transportation Security Administration on their proposed security directives on cybersecurity. We've engaged with leadership of pipeline companies, including the CEOs of companies that Mr. Black and Mr. Grubb represented, to make sure we're all on the same page, and more coordination between the private sector, between the government and the private sector, and between the government agencies like the ones I referenced, is integral to mitigating this increasing threat.
And a quick follow-up to that, do you believe you have the statutory authority and tools you need to keep our pipeline infrastructure secure?
We don't have the security responsibility, but we're actually hiring a cyber expert. Even though we don't have jurisdiction in that space, it does affect the areas that we do have jurisdiction. The nexus between operations and cybersecurity, just the same as Congressman Stauber noted, for physical security, when we find issues, we want to flag them from Transportation Security Administration. And when they find them, we want to know about that. We train their inspectors on pipeline safety issues. So we will continue to keep up that close collaboration.
That's great. I appreciate that. And speaking of collaboration, this next question is open for all the witnesses. Where do you see the gaps in our pipeline cybersecurity infrastructure, and what do you need from Congress to address these threats?
I'll answer last because I've talked a lot here.
TSA has primary jurisdiction, as the Deputy Administrator has said, and they've identified critical facilities and required security directives of pipeline operators. That engagement with TSA and DOE is pretty good. Pipeline operators participate in a public-private partnership, oil and natural gas sector coordinating council, where we can do classified briefings and talk threats. TSA has seen that they need to evolve their requirements on pipeline operators to make sure that we're keeping up with the latest threats. There's a lot of bad guys out there who are trying to stop pipelines, but the public-private partnerships and the actions by pipeline operators are heading in the right direction. I don't have a recommendation for you.
For sure, and especially as you see more sophisticated technology in terms of the pipeline management. I can imagine the increase in technology also increases the exposure and the risk, and so I appreciate you continuing to monitor with our different agencies, TSA being the primary lead.
So I as well don't have a recommendation, but I appreciate the question. But I will tell you that Kinder Morgan's definitely engaged with TSA and SEPA regarding cybersecurity of our pipelines. And in fact, our CEO was in Washington late last week, meeting with those agencies and talking through and collaborating on the importance of cybersecurity and plans and programs going forward.
I'll just add, one thing we've floated is having a detail from a regulated entity with cyber expertise. Again, while we don't have that jurisdiction, we still benefit, I think, from the sort of internal knowledge of how an operator navigates some of these challenges, and vice versa, that I think they can appreciate what we need to know in an incident like the Colonial cyber incident.
Thank you. I appreciate all of you, and I apologize for not having time to yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman's time has expired. I now yield 5 minutes to Mr. Duarte.
Hello. Thank you, Mr. Chair, Ranking Member. Appreciate the hearing today. Mr. Brown, good day. The fiscal year 2023 Appropriations Act provided more than $319 million in new funding for the Pipeline Hazardous Materials Safety Association. And as you know, the Pipes Act required PHMSA to maintain a minimum of 247 pipeline inspection personnel for fiscal year 2023. Your current count is 207. And now we learn that this funding includes a total of 33 positions, including 6 positions for pipeline safety climate change experts. Given the clear direction of Congress that PHMSA hire a minimum of 247 pipeline inspection and enforcement personnel, how can you justify 6 positions related to climate change in an agency that is supposed to be focused on safety? And what are these 6 climate change experts doing that is not covered by the regular pipeline inspection personnel?
I want to make sure we get a very robust answer as a follow-up to this hearing, because over the first 2 years, we were meeting the year-on-year increases of 20% each year. At the end of a year, we often lose folks to retirement. I want to make sure we get you the up-to-date numbers and factor in those changes. We also initiated new recruitment and retention proposals that are currently pending with Office of Personnel Management. For example, the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement pays their engineer inspectors about 30% more than we're able to pay ours. Additionally, there's at least one state that pays about 30% more. We just want to be able to be on that same level playing field. We can't compete with the private sector in terms of compensation, but we welcome any incentives.
Great.
It's not for a lack of trying.
Well,
We
thank you
certainly
for
want
that.
more
The core of my
inspectors.
question is, what are the climate change experts
Great.
doing that your regular safety personnel are not doing?
Yes. So this committee directed us to consider environmental impacts in our rulemakings. Right. That's been a directive from this committee. We have to implement that. We've been in the last administration promulgated a rule in which 15 state attorneys general sued us because we did not consider environmental impacts. When our rule is litigated and basically held in abeyance, we can't do our work on those rules until we consider the environmental impacts. As I noted before, we had less than one full-time employee considering environmental impacts when it's in our mission statement. So we need a few folks. That also includes, lithium-ion batteries. So half of our agency oversees 1 in 10 goods that move in the United States. Nuclear waste, lithium-ion batteries.
Okay, I got it. It's been said that if everything's a priority, then nothing gets priority. FSMA requests more resources from Congress to complete this core mission. Now you're spending these resources on activities that have no correlation with pipeline safety. We can all talk about climate change until the cows come home. We can all talk about, are we facilitating the use of natural gas, and does natural gas contribute to climate change? Your core mission is keeping the natural gas in the natural gas pipeline because, as you said, it is a very powerful, when released, a very powerful climate driver. And so in this change in mission, is this change in mission being directed by the White House? And what communications have you had with them regarding this new direction for FSMA?
So I agree with what you said. So I think maybe there's just a disconnect on sort of our common understanding that when we're keeping product in the pipe, that's mitigating climate change, right? So that's what we're trying to do, is keep the product in the pipe. That's improving safety, mitigating
I
climate
guess I have to ask, you used to have quarterly meetings with the industry. The FSMA group and your group used to have quarterly meetings, and yet, the best way to keep gas in the pipe and to keep environmental catastrophes from happening is working closely with the people who are most engaged in keeping them from happening, and as the industry folks here are very incentivized to deliver safety and delivery within their pipelines. You haven't been having the meetings since 2021. How can you achieve your stated purpose without better engagement with the industry?
I believe we've had 5 advisory committee meetings in the last few years. Those are primarily focused on, and their role as Congress set out, to consider rulemakings. We had the most productive year in our agency's history in 2021 in rulemakings. Many of those had already had the advisory committee meeting for those rulemakings. So you can expect a bunch more, either a bunch more meetings or longer meetings to just get more done at one meeting instead of having a bunch of separate meetings, because it takes a ton of staff time to actually set up for those meetings. And it also takes a lot of time, and I know people are very generous. We've got members here represented in actually going to those meetings, but we're trying to make it as efficient as possible instead of just having meetings, which in this town often don't always produce results.
I can see that. I'll yield back.
Thank you. I now yield 5 minutes to Mr. Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member. 273 crossing fatalities, 1,475 per year between 2005 to 2021. GPAC meetings, making sure these communities are safe becomes very, very important. Mr. Grubb, can you explain the benefits of Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration issuing a final class rule?
So there's 3 main benefits. Thank you for the question, by the way. There's 3 main benefits associated with finalizing the class location rule. The first is updating the outdated regulation that's been in place for over 50 years. It was put in place prior to inline inspection being developed and those technologies being further advanced. The second benefit is, we will eliminate over 800 million cubic feet that's emitted annually by virtue of having alternative methods of compliance with the current regulation. The third benefit is the hundreds of millions of dollars that industry is spending on replacing perfectly safe pipe that's in accordance with the current regulation can be reallocated to other safety measures, other safety benefits on these pipeline systems. We hope that PHMSA will finalize this rule as soon as possible based on those three benefits.
Can you share with me what your company does to ensure pipeline safety?
So, the main things are we respond to incidents with the priorities of lives and property first. We investigate incidents to determine the causes and the facts of those incidents, and then we use those findings to improve our processes and procedures.
So we know how important it is to involve the community. And I just heard Mr. Brown suggest that there's been 5 meetings over the last several years. Do you think that's ample? I mean, we're talking about keeping the community involved, making sure that they understand the most up-to-date safety measures, that they know the early warnings, that they know the areas to be protected. I suggest that these meetings should be much more frequently held.
These are largely to consider the text of regulations that we promulgate and come to a consensus on those, on that text. And so we are trying to time them where we can get, if given the interest in our finishing our rulemakings quickly, to try to get as many rulemakings on one of those meetings as possible. Otherwise, it's just, it extends the amount of work everyone has to do.
But you would agree that having community involvement is essential.
I'm sorry?
You would agree that having community involvement is essential.
Yeah, community's welcome to attend those meetings, but it's largely only attended by the statutory members of that committee, which is 15 individuals. And they represent 5 people from industry, 5 from governmental entities, and then 5 public members.
So what individuals are mandated that must be in attendance for these meetings?
Well, actually, no one's mandated to attend, but there are 15 members of the committee that are statutorily required to be appointed.
15 members from where?
5 from industry, 5 from the public, 5 from governmental entities, state and local.
Okay, so tell me about the 5 from the public.
So we, for the first time, appointed a labor representative, the people that actually do the work that we're talking about on the ground. Mr. Karam's a member, and his organization is represented as a member of the public. We have an environmental organization, Environmental Defense Fund, represented, law professor, and then for the first time, we're trying to focus on, can we get some engineer professors, so people with sort of the greatest amount of expertise in this space, committed to our mission of safety and environmental.
Well, why not individuals? Why not people from the community, people that are most impacted? You say those 5 are community, but I didn't hear you say anybody from a neighborhood. I didn't say you hear anybody from a school, anyone from a church, anyone from the affected community. May I?
Yeah, we do it.
Yeah. Let me ask first.
Oh, sorry.
It's important that when we talk about these things that we involve community.
Absolutely.
And if you call it a community 5, then that community should truly be representative of the people in the community.
My understanding of what Congress...
The gentleman's time has expired.
I yield.
I now yield 5 minutes to Mr. Molinaro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate that. Mr. Brown, I want to get to you in a moment, but I strongly suggest that long meetings don't produce better outcomes. Effective meetings produce better outcomes. Congress is a living example of some of that, and I trust that you can appreciate that. I do want to, Mr. Grubb, though, I want to follow up on the class location rule. I appreciated my colleagues' questions. Could you remind us, however, how long the industry's been waiting for the rule to be finalized?
Thank you for the question. Over 20 years.
So, Mr. Brown, what exactly is the reason why over 20 years is the time in which the industry has been waiting?
The question the chairman asked me first about the LNG facilities rule, that's about 30 years. That one, big safety impacts. This one, more efficiency, potential impacts for reducing environmental emissions. We focus on safety first. We had 3 rules that we finished last year that were over 10 years in the making that this committee said you must get done, in 30 days, in 1 year. So we are focusing on the ones that Congress has given us deadlines for, and prioritizing safety first.
Dear God, I can only imagine that if 10 years is priority, I can't imagine what 30 is. It's a bit of an embarrassment, wouldn't you think? I mean,
yeah, in the last administration, I just went to revisit that exact same hearing, and you got the exact same questions from both sides of the aisle. Why does it take so long? And the amount of things that we oversee, natural gas, for example, triple what it was 5 years ago that we oversee. Carbon dioxide, hydrogen, $100 billion in incentives. We have 0 full-time employees focused on that. Our ability to get things done is directly proportional to the resources that Congress gives us.
Yeah, I tend to question that as a former government official, local government official. I tend to think that it's a lack of focus and focused on efficient outcomes. I've never been involved in government where somebody didn't say what I need is more people to accomplish more, and when we do, they don't accomplish it any quicker. We just have more people doing the same thing. That's my observation. I'll be glad to engage in that a little bit further as we get further down further upon pipeline. But I want to return, Mr. Grubb. So the PIPES Act of 2016 convenes this voluntary information sharing system working group. It's supposed to recommend Congress it was recommended that Congress authorize such a program to share pipeline safety information while providing confidentiality for disclosures. Could you speak briefly to the benefits of that, and then how might Congress or PHMSA address the concerns about sharing proprietary information?
Thank you for the question. So INGA and its member companies strongly support sharing of information across the sector. It's something that we have done for many years. It's something we'll continue to do. We learn from those. We modify our procedures associated with the learnings from other companies as well as our own. We highly value it. It's something that we share not only with industry sectors, but across the regulatory groups, the governmental groups, the public safety organizations. It's very beneficial. It's something we champion. With respect to this particular program, I don't have a lot of details on the inner workings of it and how it would work. Would certainly be willing to look at that and take that back and respond in writing, but don't have any particular information relative to the inner workings of that information sharing that you reference.
Okay, and of course, protecting proprietary information, obviously a priority for the industry, and as we address that, obviously some guidance and input would be useful. Mr. Brown, I know that you've already addressed this for my sake, and I'm just getting used to the concept of asking questions that have already been answered as a new member of Congress, but I'm happy to continue in that fine tradition. I wanted to talk, if you could, in my last 30 seconds, the technology pilot program allows operators to deploy that technology that we know will both spur innovation, has environmental benefit, and of course, increase safety. Can you just reiterate why we've had no participants?
I think Mr. Black has reiterated a few times that from the perspective of those who are looking to participate, the burden is too high for them to meet. And so we're happy to work with folks because we do want to get to the same place, which is using innovative technologies. We don't want to sacrifice safety, and we don't want to sacrifice environmental impacts. But if we can come up with rules of the road there, I mean, that's what we publicly asked for, and we just haven't gotten the suggestion of how to do that. We have gotten the suggestion that we shouldn't consider the environmental impacts, right? But, you know, the Congress said we have to, is our legal interpretation of that. So I don't know if I can add too much more, but I do think it's an important point, and glad to work with you.
We'd like that, and Mr. Chairman, with the degree of priority, without being snide, perhaps we could achieve that in less than 20 years.
Thank you. Gentleman's time has expired. I now recognize Mr. Huffman for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the witnesses. If I have learned anything in my 10 years in Congress, it's that my colleagues across the aisle pretty much look at any situation, almost every hearing, every bill, as an opportunity to push the fossil fuel agenda. And so I guess it's no surprise that this week, apparently the GOP messaging memo was to use the toxic rail tragedy in East Palestine as a pivot to make the case for more fossil fuel pipeline infrastructure. Never mind that was vinyl chloride, and the pipelines that they want are oil and gas. I understand why they want to pivot to fossil fuel pipelines, but let's not pretend that that's safe. The truth, if we're honest about it, is that fossil fuel pipelines are disasters waiting to happen, plain and simple. Great example of that is the Keystone XL, or the Keystone Pipeline. Over the last 12 years, it's had 22 oil spills, including 2 large spills between 2017 and 2019. The GAO issued a report in 2021 regarding this pipeline's safety record, showing that it had been deteriorating, identifying construction issues as the primary contributor, but maybe the more shocking part of that report was that the Keystone Pipeline's terrible safety record was about the same on average as other fossil fuel pipelines all over this country. So when you put that together with Mr. Karam's testimony showing the number of significant incidents is slightly increased since 2010, I think we've just got to be very clear-eyed about pipeline safety and fossil fuel pipeline safety, specifically in this country. In December 2022, Keystone sprung another big leak. This time, 14,000 barrels spilled in Nebraska. It was the pipeline's largest spill since it began operating in 2010, the largest onshore oil spill in the U.S. since 2013. And PHMSA officials had been told, had actually told the GAO way back in 2001 that they had learned lessons and that they were applying those lessons to inspecting pipelines that were under construction. But here we are. And so, Mr. Brown, I've been impressed by your knowledge and your competency. You've given great answers to all the questions. If we have to have this spaghetti web of pipelines moving dangerous, toxic, volatile fossil fuel all over this country every day, I want a competent person like you overseeing it. I really do, and I respect the work that you do. But you also said, you gave us this lessons learned line that we've heard many times before. And I just want to ask if you can appreciate the fact that we've heard this many, many times before. So as you undertake your rulemaking under the Pipes Act, can you give us something more specific about specific lessons that you're going to put into practice to make these pipelines more safe?
Yeah, and if I, absolutely, but I just want to get to that really important point that people find it very disconcerting that we focus on lessons learned. That's like by design. That's Congress telling us, and the statutes.
You should do it. I'm not saying you shouldn't do it.
Well, no, of course, and I just want everybody in the room to understand. We just had a hearing in the D.C. Circuit on a rule, and a little bit of the commentary was that unless you can point to a failure specifically, then you can't do a rulemaking. You're not going to survive the legal standard that has been set up by Congress.
Understood. And reclaiming my time, because I want you to learn those lessons and to apply them to your rulemakings, I do want to ask Mr. Karam about hydrogen. One of the latest things that we're hearing is that all of these new fossil fuel pipelines will soon be carrying hydrogen. We can start blending it right away, and eventually it'll be all hydrogen. But it's not that simple, is it, Mr. Karam? We know that the California PUC has just done a study suggesting that there are serious risks and gaps in research and regulations regarding blending hydrogen into fossil fuel pipelines, and that we could very well face leaks from fittings, gaskets, valve stems. What are some of the things we should be concerned about before we get too far down the path of hydrogen pipelines?
Yes, thank you for the question. And the Pipeline Safety Trust commissioned a report on the safety of hydrogen pipelines that I encourage everyone to review. We found that hydrogen has some unique physical characteristics that are very different from methane that make it more dangerous from methane. Primarily a much larger flammability range, meaning it more likely to ignite it at different concentrations. And it also poses known integrity issues to pipes and components, embrittlement and things like that, which would lead to more failures. There are some really large knowledge gaps that both PHMSA and the industry through research organizations are attempting to fill, but that we're years away from answering those questions.
Thank you. And Mr. Chair, I see that I'm out of time. I don't have enough time to get into CO2 pipelines, which are not a climate solution there for enhanced oil recovery, but we'll do that another day. I appreciate your indulgence.
Thank you, Mr. Huffman. I now yield 5 minutes to Mr. Kane.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank all the witnesses being here today. As we begin our work to reauthorize pipeline safety legislation, I look forward to working with every single member of the subcommittee to improve pipeline safety through a balanced regulatory approach. As we've heard, the United States is the largest network of energy pipelines in the world. Oversight of the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration safety programs should be a top priority for the subcommittee in achieving our common goal, our shared goal of zero pipeline incidents. Mr. Black, the Pipes Act of 2020 creates a technology pilot program that allows operators to test innovative technologies and practices that improve safety in the field. How do operators use innovative technology and practices to improve the pipeline safety of their systems? And what benefits would a technology pilot program give to operators?
We're excited about the benefits of innovation in inspection and analytic technologies, and we want them to be rolled into how PHMSA regulates pipelines. And I know innovation is very important to you and your part of New Jersey. Pipeline inspections occur through inline inspections, so-called smart pig, that travel on the inside of the pipe. And through the decades, the sensors that have been put on the pipe have grown more and more sophisticated. We can see more things. Similarly, back in the office, we're using newer techniques to harness the data from that. But the regulations that PHMSA uses for the schedule that pipelines must address incidents are more than 20 years old. But yet we've had all these innovations. So we're grateful to Congress for creating a pipeline safety demonstration program. Sadly, it hasn't worked. Nobody's applied because it was made too hard. They went beyond what Congress was suggesting. With some reforms that I'm happy to go into, we can road test. PHMSA can see the benefits of new inspection technologies and how reorienting the schedule that operators need to address risks on improves pipeline safety. That's our goal. Let's use innovation, new technology, even machine learning to improve. We're doing it, but we need the PHMSA schedules to improve.
Okay. Thank you. Deputy Administrator Brown, PHMSA has only held one GPAC meeting since January 2021, and that was in October 20th to 21st of 2021. In the past, you've had many GPAC meetings while also issuing complicated notice of rule makings and final rules. Why have you had so few meetings?
So in the past, we've also had years where we didn't get any rulemakings done. So we might have had meetings but not done rulemakings. These meetings are exclusively, in at least from my perspective, and all the demands on getting rulemakings done are to advance rulemakings. We have to have a meeting in order for a rulemaking to advance. We had the busiest year in our history in producing pipeline safety rulemakings in 2021, nearly the busiest in 2022. we have no aversion to having these meetings. We just want to make them as efficient as possible, given the demands we have for all the rulemakings we have to complete.
Thank you. And to Mr. Grubb, can you please explain to the subcommittee what your committee does to ensure the safety of its pipeline system?
So thank you for the question. So over time, right, pipeline operators have invested highly in advancements in pipeline inline inspection technology, right? That has improved immensely over time. The other things are implementation of pipeline safety management systems. We have one at Kinder Morgan. We call it our operations management system. It's really a system that defines our culture, right? And there's three main tenets of our operations management system. The first is, every employee has a role in the OMS. The second is instilling a culture of continuous improvement and operational excellence. And the first, and the last, and certainly not least, is risk reduction, right? Risk reduction to our assets, to the people that live near our pipelines, to our employees, to our contractors that work in our pipelines. That's a main part of what we do to reduce risk and manage the safety of our pipelines. The third and last thing is joint industry collaboration, right, of which GPAC meetings are also crucial and key, interacting with other industries or other industry subject matter experts, government experts, as well as public safety organization experts.
Thank you to the entire panel for your testimony. I'll yield back the remainder of my time.
Thank you. I now yield 5 minutes to Mr. Malalfa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm glad I was able to slide into the newer, larger second base just in time. Apologies, overlapping committees makes it tough around here, but appreciate being able to folks work with this committee and extremely important topics here on pipelines, which we're rely heavily upon in this country, and we need more of. So let me launch into here real quickly. Now, safety is a cornerstone, and that's what much of the work of Congress is seeking to do in increasing safety in all aspects of our lives, including pipelines. What I note is that the average U.S. company pays approximately $10,000 per employee per year to comply with federal regulations. So laws passed with good intent can be completely changed by the time the implementation is completed or years, decades go by. We see that a lot with the creep of responsibility and jurisdiction. So more input is received, the rules that companies have to comply with become less flexible and more burdensome input by federal government and agencies. An estimate of the National Association of Manufacturers put the total economic cost of regulations every year at $2 trillion. In the 2020 Pipes Act, Congress recognized this and sought partially to address it by telling the PHMSA to immediately carry out a pilot program to let pipeline operators evaluate new technology and operational changes to improve pipeline safety, but in a way it's efficient and also economical. Again, apologies if some of this is redundant from earlier work today, but since it took too long to send the guidance to the operators, the report that they were required to send to Congress a year later is completely void of recommendations, is my understanding. So, tossing this to Mr. Grubb here, do you know of any recent innovations with technology or operational changes that could have improved pipeline safety under this pilot program?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the last part of the question?
Some of the innovations with technology or operational changes that could have improved the pipeline safety under the pilot program that was to be done under PHMSA.
Yeah, so to my knowledge, there hasn't been any takers on the technology pilot program because of the complications that Mr. Black talked about. But I can tell you that pipeline operators are advancing technology on their own.
On their own, yeah.
And I can tell you that Kinder Morgan, one of our pipelines, was the first pipeline to implement a tool that detects cracks, environmental cracking in its pipelines. And that was done many, many years ago. It received PHMSA approval. It was the first pipeline to have received that approval. And it's become the industry standard today for detecting cracks.
So the Pipes Act did not really aid in the expediting in this, in a pilot program?
No, because of the issues that Mr. Black referenced earlier.
Pipes Act helped. PHMSA implementation meant nobody took it up. Pipes Act was good. We'd like you to continue, maybe give more direction to PHMSA, have a longer program. Congress was in the right place.
Okay, what do we need to do to then speed up or do additional work to make Pipes Act effective and something you would want to access?
Say that decisions under, on pilot program applications don't need to follow NEPA, have an environmental assessment, have a reasonable standard review that is less than something for a permanent waiver, and not use the permanent waiver process, and give this enough time to work. We believe that it can. The technologies on ultrasound and MRI and pipelines can improve safety.
So even though it's a pilot program designed to speed things up, it's still under the guidelines of a long-term permitting process. It hasn't really changed.
It's suffering many of the same problems. Yes, sir. 2 years later, we haven't made notable progress.
Okay, what do we need to do in order to modify or, streamline, massage that act in order to make it so it would be accessible and actually a helpful tool?
Thank you. That'd be great, and we'd like to work with you. Reauthorize it for a long time. Tell PHMSA to stick with the mandates that you've given. Tell them we don't need to do environmental assessments and R&D projects. We don't need to use the special permit process. Let's make this work.
R&D shouldn't need environmental review.
Yes, sir.
Okay, makes sense. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back. Appreciate the time.
The gentleman yields. Are there any further questions from any members of the subcommittee who have not been recognized? Seeing none, that concludes our hearing for today. I would like to thank each one of the witnesses for your testimony. I would like to thank Ranking Member Payne for being here. Look forward to working with you for the next several months. I ask unanimous consent that the record of today's hearing remain open until such time as our witnesses have provided answers to any questions that may be submitted to them in writing. Without objection, so ordered. I also ask unanimous consent that the record remain open for 15 days for any additional comments or information submitted by members or witnesses to be included in the record of today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. The subcommittee stands adjourned.